Welcome to TWD Symbolism Analysis, hosted by me at TWD Music Box Mystery, also known as author Lisa K. Hill. This is where we totally geek out about the recurring symbols we see in the show, what they mean, how they connect, and what they foreshadow. So if you're a TWD geek, come over to the dark side. We have Daryl. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TWD Symbol Analysis. So we have started the back half of season 10. I really loved the episode 9. I thought it was really great, really well put together. It ended very sad, but I really like where it's going. And I have high hopes for this back part of the season. So today we are going to talk about the aftermath of Grady and the weirdness of it. So I talked last episode about how Beth's death was really weird and there's a lot of strangeness around it that has never been explained. Well, so here's what happened. Coda aired, and of course that was the mid-season finale, so then they went into an 8-week hiatus and didn't come back till February. Everybody was very interested to see what was going to happen at that point. And remember how I told you that I came to Team Delusional, a couple of weeks after Coda aired? So by that point I had been reading up on all of Team Delusional's theories. I had not started my account yet, so I was not doing theories of my own. I was just reading and sort of commenting on other people's theories, but I had sort of been immersing myself in that world for, quite a while at that point, almost 2 months. And then the 9th episode came back, and it was called What Happened and What is Going On. And based on that title, I at least, and I'm sure plenty of others, thought that this was going to explain the weirdness around Beth. And at that point, I was a believer in Team Delusional. I didn't think she was dead, so that title gave me a lot of hope that this was going to be very explanatory and maybe would show that she wasn't really dead after all and things like that. Well, obviously that's not what happened. In fact, she appeared in the episode as one of Tyrese's hallucinations, which, if anything, at least on the surface, kind of suggested that she was dead, because the other people in the hallucination, including Lizzie and Mika and Bob and Martin and the governor, they were all dead. There's actually reasons that doesn't hold up, that Beth is dead because of that. Maybe I'll get into that at some point. But the episode didn't really explain much. If anything, it left a lot more questions than answers, and that was mostly because it was very abstract. It actually happens to be one of my favorite episodes to this day. I think it's a really beautifully put together episode, and once you read the symbolism and kind of know what they're going for there, or have an idea of what they're going for there, it does explain things in a way, but not in a way that's super clear. So I will probably do a video on that episode at some point, but again, that's not actually what I'm talking about today. We're talking about the aftermath of Grady. So I left off saying last time that Beth's body disappeared, we didn't see it get buried, and the fire truck also disappeared. Well, one of the first things we see in episode 9 is a burial going on, and here's something that really confused the fandom a lot, because to this day there's a lot of people that think the burial that we see at the beginning of the episode was Beth's burial, and that's mostly from more casual viewers that don't pay very close attention to what's going on, so it just didn't really occur to them that the burial we see at the beginning of the episode is the same one we see at the end. They're both Tyrese's burial, but of course we don't realize that as viewers until we get to the end and see that he has died. But once again, we didn't actually see a burial for Beth. In the episode of The Talking Dead, after episode 9 aired, Greg Nicotero was on it, and somebody asked him how long it had been since Coda, because it was so abstract and it was hard to determine how much time had passed, and he immediately answered 17 days. Now, that's a little strange, guys. It's weirdly specific. Again, as a storyteller, I can tell you that if I were going for a basic unit of time, it would be more general than that. You would say, oh, it's been 2 weeks. Oh, it's been 3 weeks. Or it's been a month. 17 days is a very specific number. And I'm telling you, if they have that specific a time frame, and especially because he just came up with it really fast, it was obviously an answer he had ready to go, there's a reason for that. There's some reason that it had to be 17 days instead of just, a couple of weeks, which means they have a timeline worked out for that 17 days. If they didn't, then they wouldn't have been that specific. So something happened there. And actually we can see the same thing even within the universe of The Walking Dead. For example, after Carl was shot in season 6 and lost his eye, I believe they asked Denai, who plays Michonne on TTD after that, how long it had been, and she said about a month. So I don't think it was really important that we know what happened in that month. It was just long enough for him to have healed enough to be on his feet, and for some time to have passed. There was also a lot of walkers that got inside the walls during that episode and they killed them, so long enough for them to clear that out and get back to some semblance of normalcy in Alexandria. But they were vague about the exact time, about a month, because it doesn't really matter. They're just trying to show that some time passed. But if it's 17 days, again, that's very specific. So let's look at what we actually do see in episode 9. We see a lot of images that don't make sense, and most of them probably have to do with Tyrese, and it's a foreshadow of Tyrese's death. However, there is one scene that has always bothered me, and that is that we see the group running, like really running pretty fast, and they run towards some vehicles, and we can see them pointing guns into the vehicles. They're probably checking to make sure nobody's in them because they have just found these vehicles by the side of the road and decided to kind of commandeer them. But we're not shown what they're running from. Of course, we could make an educated guess that there's walkers behind them somewhere. But this is where it gets a little weird. The last thing we saw was Daryl carrying Beth's body out, and we kind of skip over whatever happened to her. Did they bury her? Did they take her somewhere? Did they leave her behind? We're not shown what happened. And then we just see them running, and they're running from something. And yeah, it probably has to do with walkers, but it's odd that they don't show us that. So here's something that we need to establish about The Walking Dead. They generally don't skip over important events and never show them to us. Like I said, the thing about a month passing where Carl was healing is a little bit different. If there was something important that happened in that time frame, they would definitely go back and show it to us. If there's not, and I honestly don't think in that case there is, then they won't. But anytime they skip over an important event, they always go back and show it to us. They just don't always show it to us in the correct order. And there have even been times that they've shown us something that I didn't really expect them to show us. For example, in season 4, Rick kicked Carol out of the prison, and she was gone just for a day or two until the governor showed up and bulldozed the prison. And then we see her find Tyrese and the girls, including Judith. And she tells Tyrese that she saw the flames and the smoke, and when she came running back to the prison and she saw him run into the woods with the girls. Honestly, I didn't think that we needed to see anything more of Carol because that seemed like a pretty good coverage of what happened to her during that time she wasn't at the prison. They didn't show it to us, but she told us, and I didn't really expect that we would need to see any more of that. But in a later episode, we actually do see it. They go back and show us stuff that they obviously deemed was important. So once again, if there's something important that they skip over, they will just always come back and show it to us at some point. And they have still never shown us these missing 17 days. So as I said before, when I talked about the scenes that were filmed and we still haven't seen them, at some point they're going to show us these things. One thing that I did forget to mention when I talked about the weirdness of Beth's death is that there have been a few times on the show when they have filmed something and it came across as really unrealistic. And when that happened, the show went out of its way to tell the fans why. So the thing I always think of with this is it had to do with the episode called Consumed, where Daryl and Carol got into a white van and then sort of drove it off the side of the bridge. And they got a lot of flack for that because the van went off the bridge with its nose down, which means it should have landed on its bumper with its rear end in the air, right? But somehow it defied all laws of physics and landed on all 4 tires. And they got a lot of crap for that being the case. But they had a segment on The Talking Dead where they explained why that happened. They basically said, yeah, we know it's unrealistic. We're sorry. The way that we filmed it and the time and the budget we had, this is the best we could do. And we understand that it's unrealistic and that people know it's unrealistic, but it was just due to budgeting and time constraints, and we just couldn't do it any better than that. So my point is that when something doesn't make sense to the fans, they're usually pretty quick to explain why. They will address the fans' concerns and explain why it happened that way and why they had to, create the episode that way. But they've never explained anything about the weirdness of Beth's death, and they've never explained anything about the abstractness of episode 509, which just shows me that the explanation is still to come. So, okay. What do we think happened during those missing 17 days? There are a lot of theories out there. Most of this is based on symbolism that we've seen that's entwined with Beth's symbolism. So we'll see an example of something that we think has to do with Beth, and then we'll look at the other events that happen around that and say, okay, they're paralleling this with Beth in some way, so this is why we think this happened to her as well. So here's what we think. Originally, we thought that they tried to bury her and a walker horde showed up, hence the 800 walkers that Nicotero mentioned. And because of that, they had to run. Now, they wouldn't have been able to carry her because she was quite literally dead weight, so they left her behind somewhere. I talked about this a little bit before when I talked about Nicotero's comment about the 800 walkers. We do believe that they tried to bury her and that a walker horde showed up and they had to run very quickly. That might be what them running to the cars in that shot from 509 represents. And we've seen multiple cases of symbolism that suggests this. More recently, kind of a new development came about that I hadn't heard about before. So remember I talked about the missing scenes from that white church. Well, I hadn't thought about that for a long, long time. But recently a trading card was put out from Topps, who does all of the Walking Dead trading cards. And they often put little synopses of them on the back of what happened to a character in a particular season, or, usually they're just 1 or 2 sentence things, nothing big. But on this trading card, they talked about Beth being taken to a church for burial. And that really threw some of us through a loop because we did not see that. And it upset some people because they thought maybe they were trying to sort of rewrite the story because they screwed up somewhere. But I started looking into it and I found reference to that white church and those scenes that were filmed back in season 5 that we still haven't seen. The only church that we really knew about or saw anything of was Father Gabriel's church in Coda, and it was destroyed because the Horde got in and then, kind of ripped the thing to shreds. So it's not like they would have taken her back there to bury her because there was no church and it was full of walkers. They would have wanted to take her somewhere that was more peaceful. There are people who believe that the Horde breaking into Father Gabriel's church that way was sort of a foreshadow of what would happen to Beth and to the Walker Horde that would interrupt her burial. But my personal theory is that after Grady, they took her to a church, some church that they found, and had a funeral ceremony for her. And then they probably tried to take her out somewhere to bury her. I don't know where that would have been. Maybe it was just outside the church. Maybe it was somewhere else. But that's when the Walker Horde came and they had to leave her behind. It's really hard to tell at that point what happened because we have a lot of different symbols that we believe were involved, and it's really hard to say how they were involved. The biggest symbol we operated on for a long time is the trunk of the car. In episode 10, we see Maggie finding a blonde walker that is sort of tied up in the trunk of a car, and this disturbs her a lot. Now, even the general audience picked up on that and kind of figured this probably reminded her of Beth because Beth had just died right before that and she was grieving Beth. But for me, the biggest clue comes in Glenn's reaction because when he sees the walker, he's not at all confused by that. He's not at all questioning. It's like he just gets it and he kills the walker so Maggie doesn't have to, and kind of gives her this really kind of heartbreaking, understanding look about it. And so to us, that translated into something about leaving Beth in the trunk of a car. Now, if they had to leave her because of the Walker Horde, they wouldn't have wanted to leave her out in the open where the walkers would probably eat her. So they probably would have put her someplace safe so that her body would be protected from the walkers. So the trunk of a car makes sense. Now, if they were going to do that, we also kind of surmised that they were probably planning to come back and bury her at some point. The idea being they were going to run from the walkers now to save themselves and save the living. But as soon as the Horde passed through, they could return and give her a proper burial. And especially knowing Daryl's character, he would have wanted to do that. He would have wanted to lay her to rest. From there, it's hard to know exactly what happened. Like I said, we do think the fire truck was involved somehow. And the fire truck's an interesting symbol because we've seen fire trucks more than once throughout the show being used to rescue people. We especially saw this in season 4 of Fear the Walking Dead in a big way. So we're not sure how that plays in, if maybe she used a fire truck in some way once she woke up to, rescue herself in some way. Again, we don't know. And keep in mind that this probably wasn't a single one-off event. We're talking 17 missing days. So it's probably what you would call a compound event, that a bunch of different things happened over a larger span of time. We just don't know what they were. And we are not going to know until they show us. But we do believe that she lived. She came to. Back to episode 509, there are, again, very abstract images, and we're not told exactly what they mean. And as far as we can tell, they don't have a whole lot to do with Tyrese, but there are images of what looks like a female walker waking up in the front seat of a car. And people have even said that, yes, it's just a silhouette. We can't see who this walker is or what she's wearing. But if you look at her wrists, it looks a lot like the sweater Beth was wearing at Grady when she got shot. So we're not even saying this is supposed to be Beth, but it is supposed to be symbolic of her waking up in the car. And again, that's something that we've seen symbolism for that multiple episodes over the season since. So it's something we believe. The short of it is just that we believe they took her to a church for a funeral, a white church. They tried to bury her, and then the Walker Horde showed up and interrupted them. They left her behind in some way, probably came back at some point to bury her. And here's the real kicker. When they came back, her body was gone. Now, we believe it's because she woke up and left somehow. But the group would not have even probably considered that as a possibility. Because she was shot in the head, like a lot of the audience, they just automatically assumed that she had died. So, again, if they had any inkling at all that she was alive, they would have been looking for her. More likely, they think that, especially because the shot on her head was so high up at the top of her head, it certainly didn't penetrate her brainstem. They probably think that she turned into a walker at some point and staggered away. It also could be something along the lines of what happened with Lori. Remember when Rick went in to find Lori's body, it was gone, and it was because a walker had eaten her. So they either think that she is a walker or that she was eaten and her body was dragged away. Another big clue to that is that we see Maggie crying next to an open car door in episode 9. That was always a big one for me because we're not told what's going on there. Why is the camera looking out from inside the car? Why is the car door open and why is Maggie sitting there crying? Again, most of the general audience would just assume that this is her grieving for Beth. But that open car door is a big clue. Like, maybe they left her in the car and when they came back, the door was open, and they probably don't know what happened. Did someone else open the door? Did walkers get it open somehow? I mean, they don't know. All they know is that Beth's body is gone. Another big clue we have to this, which I think I mentioned before, it comes from episode 15, when Daryl and Aaron find that girl's body on the tree and he looks up into her face. That's a big clue we have, that he thinks there's a Beth Walker out there somewhere. He probably did look for her, because he would have, but was never able to find her. And at some point, Rick put his foot down and said, we've got to move on. We can't stay in the area, especially if there's too many walkers around. So we don't believe that Daryl ever actually got to lay Beth to rest. And that's a good thing from our point of view, because we believe she's alive. But from his point of view, he never received closure on that, which was why he was so depressed for so many seasons after that. All right, well, I need to wrap this up, but let me just mention a couple more things that are clues at the end of Coda that something strange was going to happen. So after Coda, after we see Daryl take Beth's body outside of Grady, we have sort of an after the credits scene with Morgan. Morgan gets to Father Gabriel's church and sets up an altar, and all of those things are probably highly symbolic, but the biggest thing is that we see him walking around the same school that Father Gabriel was at before the Walker Horde went to his church. And there's a couple of magazines in the grass near Morgan. One of them says Top 44 on it, and the other one is a Wolf magazine. The Top 44 is suspicious to us for a couple of reasons. It sort of comes across as a music magazine, so you get like Top 10 and Top 50 billboards, but Top 44 is a strange number to have. Now, if you've ever read the comic books, you'll know that comic book Andrea was shot in the head in comic book issue 44. She showed up again, alive and well, in comic book issue 45. So we believe this was a hint that Beth got that arc from comic book Andrea, and, Coda was where she was shot in the head, paralleling that. And anytime we see a 45 in the show, we believe it's a clue about the resurrection of a character that is presumed dead. Then there's the wolf thing. I won't go into this too much, but as I've said before, we thought that Beth would return with the wolves in season 6 because there's so much wolf symbolism around her. And I believe the wolves were a forerunner of the Whisperers, so in terms of her return, it was probably pointing more toward the Whisperers than the wolves. But again, there's a lot of wolf symbolism around her. Again, remember the Up the Wolves song from Still, so it's just another clue about Beth's symbolism and about her arc coming back around despite the fact that she was shot in Coda. Okay, so I'm going to wrap that up for today. This is running kind of long. I've got a few more of these that I want to do in order, but after that, it doesn't really matter what order I go in once I kind of get the basics established. So if there's something you would specifically like to hear me talk about or do a video on, please comment and let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate you. All right, see you next time.